Whom the gods would destroy, they first make mad. Ancient proverb. Welcome back to DD History, where we tell the big, messy, sometimes hilarious and sometimes tragic stories of the past. Today, we're continuing our journey into one of the greatest disasters of the ancient world, the Sicilian Expedition. When we left off, Athens had sent the largest fleet in its history across the sea. Thousands of soldiers, hundreds of ships, and enough supplies to feed an empire. Families had cheered them on from the docks, the city buzzed with excitement, and the dream was bold: conquer Syracuse, dominate Sicily, and maybe reshape the Mediterranean forever. But dreams don't always survive contact with reality. Already, things were unraveling. Alcibiades, the flashy, ambitious golden boy of Athens, was recalled home on charges of sacrilege, only to defect to Sparta and spill every Athenian's secret he knew. Lamachus, the steady hand and the only general willing to act decisively, had fallen in battle. That left Nicias, an aging, reluctant commander who hadn't wanted this expedition in the first place, holding the reins. Nicias's strategy was, well, not really a strategy. He stalled, delayed, and hesitated. Instead of striking quickly, he gave Syracuse time to rally, build defenses, and call in allies. The grand momentum of Athens' fleet was starting to sputter, and as if that wasn't enough, Sparta was now fully in the loop, thanks to Alcibiades' betrayal. They knew where Athens was weak. They knew exactly how to sabotage the expedition. And soon, they would send their best man to do it. This is where the story shifts from bold ambition to creeping disaster. The Athenians still had numbers, ships, and money, but their advantage was slipping away, and the gods, or maybe just bad luck and bad leadership, were about to make things far, far worse. Today we'll see how Nicias struggled to hold the line, how Syracuse found unexpected strength, and how one Spartan commander named Gylippus turned the entire campaign upside down. So grab your helmets, sharpen your spears, and maybe keep a trireme handy for a quick getaway, because the Sicilian expedition is about to take a very dark turn. Athens had gone all in. Their fleet was massive, their ambition was legendary, their confidence maybe a little overcooked. But after Alcibiades skipped town and defected to their enemies no less, and Lamachus died, the command of the expedition fell to Nicias, the man who had voted against the expedition in the first place. Imagine sending your football team into the championship game, and your head coach is the guy who tried to cancel the season. That's Nicias. Now, to be fair, Nicias wasn't incompetent in the sense of not knowing how war worked. He had fought plenty of campaigns before, but he was deeply cautious, overly religious, and frankly terrified of making the wrong move. So what did Nicias do when he took sole command? He hesitated. The Athenians had the bigger army, the bigger navy, and an element of surprise, at least at first. But instead of striking Syracuse quickly and decisively, Nicias set up camp and started digging trenches, hemming and hawing, and waiting for omens from the gods. Meanwhile, Syracuse used that time to rally. They fortified their walls. They called in allies. They got stronger every day the Athenians delayed. If Athens had attacked hard in the beginning, they might have taken Syracuse before help could arrive. Instead, they gave their enemies breathing room. And as any student of history knows, never give your enemies breathing room. Despite Nicias's snail-paced campaign, the Athenians still managed to get some early wins. They built walls around Syracuse, literally trying to choke the city into submission. This was a classic Greek tactic: wall your enemy in until they either surrender or starve. And at first, it worked. Syracuse was on the ropes. Their walls were incomplete, morale was low, and it looked like Athens might win by sheer persistence. But Syracuse wasn't ready to quit. They built counter-walls. They launched surprise attacks. They found clever ways to stall the Athenians. It was a war of walls and counter-walls, with both sides racing to box the other in. And slowly, the Syracusans were gaining ground. At this point, Athens' nightmare showed up. Sparta sent help. And not just any help. They sent Gylippus, one of their most capable commanders. This was the kind of guy who could walk into a mess and somehow turn it into a victory. Now picture this. The Athenians had been fighting Syracusans who were brave but inexperienced. Suddenly, they had to face a Spartan general who knew exactly what he was doing. Gylippus wasted no time. He reorganized the Syracusan forces, gave them discipline, boosted their morale, and, most importantly, helped them build better defenses. He also inspired confidence. With Sparta backing them, Syracuse wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. They believed they could actually win. This was the turning point. Athens' overwhelming advantage was starting to slip away. As if things weren't already going poorly for Nicias, fate seemed determined to make his life miserable. He started suffering from a painful kidney disease. He was sick, exhausted, and in constant agony, but still in command. His cautious nature became even more cautious. He was so worried about making mistakes that he made the worst mistake of all: indecision. Meanwhile, back in Athens, rumors swirled that the expedition wasn't going as planned. Reinforcements were debated. Should they send more men, more ships, or just cut their losses and hope Nicias somehow figured it out? The answer, of course, was send more men. And so Athens doubled down, sending thousands of additional troops under the command of two more generals, Demosthenes and Eurymedon. But reinforcements take time to arrive, and in the meantime, Syracuse and Gylippus were pressing the Athenians harder and harder. The siege of Syracuse turned into a grind. Skirmishes erupted constantly. Walls went up, walls got torn down, supplies grew tight. The Athenians couldn't break through, but they couldn't pull back either. And remember, Athens wasn't just fighting in Sicily. They still had the Peloponnesian War raging back home. Every resource they poured into Sicily was a resource they didn't have to defend themselves against Sparta and its allies. It was like playing chess while someone kept flipping the board over. The Athenians were still formidable, but time was no longer on their side. But before we go any further into the disaster, if you're enjoying this story of ambition, betrayal, and ancient military blunders, take a quick moment to hit that like button and subscribe to DD History. We've got plenty more epic tales from the ancient world coming your way, and your support helps us keep digging into history's best and worst stories. All right, let's march back to Sicily and see how Athens' brilliant plan falls apart piece by piece. When Athens decided to double down, they sent fresh troops and two new commanders. Demosthenes was a bold, aggressive general with a reputation for daring maneuvers. Eurymedon was solid, but less flashy. Together, they sailed into Sicily with thousands of reinforcements, hoping to break the stalemate. At first, this looked like exactly what Athens needed. The Syracusans had been holding their own, but surely they couldn't withstand yet another Athenian army. Morale rose in the Athenian camp. Soldiers whispered, "Now we'll finally finish this." But here's the thing about bold commanders. Their plans either work brilliantly or collapse spectacularly. Demosthenes wasted no time. He decided on a daring plan, a surprise night assault on the Syracusan lines. If it worked, Athens could smash through, cut off the city, and finally bring the siege to an end. So under cover of darkness, the Athenians crept forward. At first, it worked. They caught the Syracusans off guard, pushed through fortifications, and seemed poised to seize victory. But then chaos. Night fighting in the ancient world was basically a recipe for disaster. Torches flickered, shadows danced, orders got confused. Soldiers mistook friend for foe, units got separated, panic spread. The Syracusans, rallied by Gylippus, counterattacked fiercely. The Athenians, disoriented and trapped in a maze of walls and trenches, broke ranks. What had started as a daring strike turned into a bloody rout. Demosthenes had rolled the dice, and Athens lost. After the failed attack, Demosthenes took stock. His men were exhausted, demoralized, and disease was spreading in the swampy camps around Syracuse. Supplies were dwindling. He wrote to Nicias with what seemed like the only sensible suggestion: let's pack up and go home before this gets worse. Nicias, however, hesitated. Classic Nicias. Partly it was his natural caution. Partly it was his fear of how the people of Athens would react. Imagine going back to Athens and saying, "Hey, remember how you gave us this massive fleet and all those soldiers? Yeah, we accomplished nothing, so we came home early." He feared the political backlash more than he feared the Syracusans. So Nicias delayed, insisted they stay, and hoped for a miracle. Finally, after much debate, Nicias seemed to come around. Maybe retreat was the best option. The fleet was readied. Soldiers were relieved. They would finally escape the nightmare of Sicily. And then, the moon betrayed them. On the very night they planned to sail away, a lunar eclipse darkened the sky. For most of us today, it's just a cool, astronomical event. But for Nicias, who was deeply religious and superstitious, it was a terrifying omen. He consulted his soothsayers, and they told him to wait 27 days before moving the fleet. Nicias obeyed. That single decision sealed Athens' fate. The Syracusans couldn't believe their luck. They had been on the brink of losing their city, but now the Athenians were paralyzed by superstition. So Syracuse and Gylippus struck hard. They launched a massive naval assault. The Athenian fleet, already weakened by months of strain, was battered in the harbor. Ships were rammed, boarded, and sunk. Eurymedon was killed in battle. Demosthenes' troops were crushed on land. Nicias, sick and despairing, still refused to surrender, but the Athenian position was now hopeless. Desperate, the Athenians made one last plan: abandon the fleet and march inland, trying to escape across Sicily to friendly territory. So tens of thousands of Athenian soldiers packed up what they could carry and set off on foot. It was a miserable sight. Hungry, exhausted, harried at every step by Syracusan forces, the once mighty expedition now looked like a ragged band of refugees. The retreat dragged on for days. Rivers had to be crossed under fire. Skirmishes broke out constantly. The Athenians, once conquerors, were now the hunted. Eventually, surrounded and cut off, both Nicias and Demosthenes were forced to surrender. The Sicilian expedition ended not with glory, but with humiliation. Out of the enormous Athenian force that had sailed to Sicily, almost none returned. The fleet was destroyed. The army was annihilated. Nicias and Demosthenes were executed despite Nicias's pleas for mercy. Survivors were thrown into the Syracusan quarries, vast open-air prisons, where they suffered and died under the blazing sun. Thucydides, the historian who chronicled all this, summed it up with brutal simplicity. It was the greatest Greek disaster of all time. And he wasn't exaggerating. The consequences were staggering. Athens had lost an entire generation of its best soldiers and sailors. The treasury was drained. Their enemies, especially Sparta, were emboldened. Within a few years, the tide of the Peloponnesian War shifted decisively against Athens. The Sicilian Expedition wasn't just a defeat, it was the moment Athens' dream of empire began to unravel. Perhaps the saddest part is Nicias himself. He had opposed the expedition from the beginning. He had warned Athens it was a terrible idea. And yet, through politics, superstition, and hesitation, he became the man who presided over the catastrophe. It's as if fate had chosen the worst possible commander for the worst possible war. So what's the takeaway here? History students often say, why didn't Athens just cut its losses and leave? And that's exactly the point. Pride, politics, and superstition kept them from making the rational choice. The Sicilian expedition is a timeless lesson in overreach. Don't start a war you don't need. Don't double down on failure. And maybe, just maybe, Don't let the moon decide your battle plans. And so, our tale pauses on the dusty shores of Sicily. The Athenians, who came in with bright-eyed confidence, suddenly find themselves bogged down in a nightmare. Their mighty fleet is not a spear thrusting forward anymore, it's an anchor dragging them deeper into trouble. Syracuse, the underdog city Athens had hoped to roll over like a poorly made gyro, has rallied with incredible determination. Reinforcements arrive, morale soars, and those new city walls become a symbol of defiance. Syracuse, instead of being crushed, is now stronger than ever. Meanwhile, Athens, well, let's just say they're starting to look like the student who studied for the wrong exam. Supplies are tight, morale is slipping, and Nicias, the cautious general left holding the bag, is wishing harder than ever that he had stayed home with a cup of wine and a polite excuse. The expedition, once hailed as the boldest move of the Peloponnesian War, now feels more like a curse. The sheer distance, the endless political squabbling, the shocking underestimation of Syracuse, all of it piles up. The gods, if they're watching, must be shaking their heads and saying, "Yup, classic hubris." And that's where we'll leave things, for now. Because, as bad as this looks, it's about to get worse. Athens is trapped in a quagmire, and the next chapter will see desperation, betrayal, and one of the most catastrophic endings in all of Greek history. So, what can we learn from this? The Sicilian expedition reminds us that even great powers can overreach, that arrogance often blinds leaders to reality, and that when someone says, "Hey, let's invade a massive island across the sea in the middle of a different war," the correct response should probably be, maybe not. But hey, don't despair. History isn't just tragedy. It's drama, it's suspense, and sometimes it's even comedy, though often unintentional. The Athenians may not be laughing, but we can at least appreciate the lessons they left behind. If you've stuck with us this far, thank you for joining the story of Athens and their ill-fated adventure in Sicily. Make sure you're subscribed, because next time we'll bring the whole expedition to its shocking conclusion. Trust me, it's a finale that will have you shaking your head, groaning, and maybe even saying, "Wow, at least my group project wasn't that bad." Until then, this has been DD History, where the past is never boring, always dramatic, and occasionally a little ridiculous. See you in the next episode.